There are a lot of ways to crash a motorcycle. Some of the most common are dropping your motorcycle at slow speeds. This happens most often because a rider doesn't practice, for one, but the most common cause of it is they have the handlebars turn and they reach out for that front brake with the handlebars turned at slow speed, and that's the quickest way I know of to drop a motorcycle. So to prevent these slow speed drops, you want to keep your head and eyes up. You want to be looking where you want the motorcycle to go. You want to use the rear brake only. So in conjunction with the clutch and in the friction zone, smooth throttle, a little bit of rear brake is going to help you control that motorcycle at slow speeds. But thankfully, these types of crashes, though they're the most common, are probably the least dangerous to the rider. Another type of crash is when a car makes a left turn in front of you. Now, this can be a whole lot more dangerous for the rider. In fact, it's probably collisions with other vehicles. This is the most common type and perhaps the most deadly to the rider. Most often a car makes a turn and a rider, because they haven't practiced emergency braking, they either lock up and freeze and drive directly into the side of the vehicle. A lot of riders will overbrake with the front or the rear brake, and then you've got the classic I had to layer down mentality where a rider is going to fall over to the side and hit the vehicle anyway, and it's most likely a result of poor braking. ABS helps a whole lot here, but the key is you want to practice emergency braking so that you have a whole lot better chance of getting that motorcycle to a stop before hitting the vehicle, or in a worst case scenario, scrubbing off a whole lot of speed before you hit that vehicle. Another common crash is rear end collisions. You want to leave some space between you and the vehicle in front of you. You want to have an escape route. You want to be watching those mirrors to see what the traffic behind you is doing. And of course, keeping the motorcycle in gear and ready to pull out is a huge benefit to avoid rear end collisions. But there's one type of crash that you rarely hear riders talk about, and it's fairly high up on the list of fatal crashes, and that's single vehicle crashes at speed. These are less talked about than others, I think in part because we've got no one to blame but ourselves. If a car pulls out in front of us, we may be bad at braking. We may say, yeah, we laid it down, but really we didn't know how to emergency brake. But in reality, we get to share some of the blame with that car that pulled out in front of us. We get to offset a little bit of the guilt that we're feeling internally. But if I'm riding out, I'm by myself, I'm on some curve somewhere, and I run off the road and there were no other vehicles around, no deer that ran out in front of me, I've got nobody to blame but me. I'm probably a little less likely to talk about those types of crashes than I would be otherwise, and I think that's why we hear less about single vehicle crashes than we do other types of crashes out there. Often in these single vehicle crashes also, the rider is riding by themselves, so they may not have someone immediately on hand to help, so that makes the situation more dangerous as well. The most common types of these single vehicle motorcycle crashes are loss of control in a curve. So a rider comes up to a curve and they lose control and they run off the side of the road is generally what happens. And these can be particularly dangerous out on the roads because you've got trees, you've got guardrails, you've got all kinds of hazards right on the side of the road. If a rider hits those at speed, we're going to come out on the losing end of that no matter how much protective gear we've got on. So when talking about single vehicle crashes, it's important that we be able to handle curves and that we practice this and take some good tips, keep some good tips in mind when we're out riding by ourselves. First of all is excessive speed. A lot of riders are going to come in, they're riding above their skill level and they get on a curve that's sharper than they realized and they don't have the skills to handle it. So you want to make sure that your entry speed to that corner is something that you can handle. And another key is that you can stop within the distance that you can clearly see up the road. So if I'm coming up to a blind curve, I don't know how sharp that curve is. I don't know what sits on the other side of that blind area. So my entry speed needs to be such that if there is something in the road, I can get that motorcycle straightened up and come to a stop. You want to be able to stop the motorcycle within the distance you can see clearly up the road. Another key in this is poor lane positioning. So like if we've got a curve to the left here and I line up on the very inside of that curve, I'm making that curve much sharper than it has to be because I'm hugging that inside line. But if I set up for that curve on the outside of the lane, then I can I've got the whole lane to kind of drift across, and I can, take some of that lean angle out of that curve, and I have to lean the motorcycle over as far, and that's going to give me some room for mistakes or room for other things that may pop up in the road that, I wasn't planning on. If I start with good lane positioning and use the width of my lane to help me, square that corner off or not have to lean the motorcycle in as far to get around through it. Another thing is target fixation. Riders come into a curve, they're out by themselves, they see a big tree right on the side of the road, and instead of looking through that curve, they start staring right at that tree or that guardrail or that thing, whatever it is they don't want to hit, and the motorcycle is going to tend to go where you're looking, and you're going to run right into the thing that you're hoping to avoid. Improper braking on a curve. Sometimes a rider's got into a curve, they see something that pops up mid-curve, there's a car that's drifting over the center line. They're going to reach out and grab those brakes as they've got the motorcycle leaned over. You've only got so much traction, and you're using part of that traction by leaning the motorcycle over. You can quickly overwhelm the brakes on the motorcycle by grabbing the brakes as you've got the motorcycle leaned over. That's one reason why I like trail braking as well. As I'm approaching the curve, I've got some slight pressure. I'm going to slow down to my entry speed, but then I'm going to maintain some slight pressure on that front brake. And as I'm leading the motorcycle into the curve, I've still got some pressure on that front brake. So my forks are still compressed a little bit. If something is in the road, I can apply just a little more brake, and I'm not giving that downward jerk on the front tire by going aggressively to the brakes. I'm just applying a little bit more brake, and it's huge for situations like that, and I think that's one of the biggest advantages of using trail braking in curves. Limited vision on curves is another reason for a lot of single vehicle crashes in curves. You want to make sure that you're, able to see through that curve before you really get on the throttle, before, you get your exit speed back up. You want to be able to see the exit to that curve and be comfortable with the speed that you're going. Another big cause of single vehicle motorcycle crashes are braking errors. The most common braking errors that lead to crashes are over braking with the front brake, locking the rear brake up and then releasing it. So if you lock the rear brake, the motorcycle is going to fishtail a little bit. If it fishtails, this direction and you let off the brake suddenly, that motorcycle is going to snap back into alignment. It's going to cause a high side crash. Over braking in a curve or lane. So we talked about that a little bit ago. If you're in a corner and you over brake in that corner, you could cause the tires to lose traction and crash there. So the key to getting better at braking and to avoid those types of errors is practice. It's one of those core skills that riders should practice on a regular basis. That's emergency braking. It's easy to do. You can go out on any open parking lot and you can practice emergency braking and make sure that skill is sharp for when you need it out on the street. Another common cause of single vehicle crashes is the failure to detect road hazards. One of the simplest things that you can do to avoid hazards on the road is to see them. It makes common sense, right? If you see the hazard on the road, you can avoid it. But a lot of times our habits puts us in a position where we don't see the hazard soon enough. A lot of riders fail to look up the road. They're going to look down towards that front tire. They're going to look 20, 30 feet out in front of the motorcycle when they need to be looking out on the horizon and see those hazards as soon as possible. That's the only way that we can adjust to the conditions on the road rather than having to react to it at the last second. That's by good head and eye discipline and keeping our head and eyes up, looking down on the road. down the road. Also, positioning of the motorcycle. If we're directly behind a vehicle in front of us, that's going to limit our view up the road. If we use poor lane position within our lane, that's going to limit our visibility up the road. So you want to position your motorcycle far enough back in traffic and position within your lane in an area that's going to give you the most visibility up the road. Your ability to see and detect hazards before they become emergencies is a huge advantage to staying upright on a motorcycle, and one of those areas where many riders fail to take into consideration. Another huge one in this area is speeding or aggressive riding. You know, this one takes some self-control. Part of the reason why many riders get into motorcycle is because they like the power that the motorcycle's got. They like the feel of that acceleration. And a motorcycle's got tons of that in comparison to a car. I mean, you'd have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of what in a car of what you could do on a motorcycle for, 6,000 or 7,000 as far as a power to weight ratio. But the inability to control that right wrist and riding above the skill level of the rider or the safe conditions of the environment leads to a ton of crashes out on the streets. The streets are not the same as a track where, I've taken a few track days, and I think that's a great way to get cornering in and to practice cornering at slightly higher speeds than what you would do out on the street. But there's a difference between cornering on a track and cornering on a street. I don't have cars coming the opposite direction. I don't have cars pulling out in front of me. I don't have trees on the side of the track. I've got wide open spaces with plenty of room to run off, and I've got traffic running all in the same direction when I'm practicing on the track day. As soon as you start treating the public streets like you would a track, you're looking for a crash to happen. So I hope these tips have helped, and I hope it helps give you some things to consider, things to think about to avoid these single vehicle crashes. Part of it happened right up here. The way we approach our riding makes a big difference on the situations that we get ourselves into out on the street. So it's important that we practice out on the parking lot, because if we don't refresh those skills, we're not going to have them when we get out on the street. So practice on a parking lot and carry those skills with you in case something unexpected happens. You've got those skills in your back pocket ready to pull out and ready to avoid a bad situation. The winter months here at MCrider get pretty slow. It was that way when I was a rider coach as well. It was a hard time getting students into a class when it was cold. Things slow down on MCrider as well. The videos aren't viewed as much because riders aren't riding as much. So if you've gotten something out of MCrider, I want to ask you to do something. Become a member of MCrider, and you can go to mcrider.com/member. It's how I support this channel. It's how I keep things going. You can get access to the field guide, to the forums. You can get ad-free videos at MCrider. I've tried to make it affordable. If it's something you can't afford, I totally understand. I'm going to continue releasing free videos just like this on YouTube. But it really is the way I support myself, and the way I support this channel is by the membership. So I hope you'll consider going to mcrider.com/member and looking at the options for membership and supporting this channel, especially through the winter months. Things get pretty slow around here. So thank you for watching. I hope this video helps. Till next week, guys, it's Kevin with MCrider, and I'll see you on the road. There's a whole lot more to MCrider than just the weekly videos. Go to mcrider.com/member. You'll get instant access to the forums and the field guide. You get ad-free MCrider videos and a whole lot more. Go to mcrider.com/member for all the details.